Welcome back to the 2025 Widening the Pipeline Fellowship virtual training series. My name is Rachel Jones, and I'm the Director of Journalism Initiatives with NPF. The theme for our September session is authentically connecting with the communities we cover. Rapid shifts in socioeconomic and political impacts in America require journalists to think a bit more deeply about the issues that they cover. The old school objective observer approach to reporting is being replaced by a more organic, proactive approach to analyzing and communicating stories. The goal is to fuel engagement and trust with audiences who have all but abandoned legacy media. During today's sessions, we'll hear from journalists and an academic who've crafted strategies that amplify this growing movement. We hope these sessions will help widening fellows consider opportunities to more authentically serve the communities they cover. For session one, we'll hear from Aallyah Wright. She's the rural issues reporter with Capital B News. Aaliyah's coverage on the digital divide in rural Black communities was a 2024 finalist for INN's Breaking Barriers Award, and her story on a rural Black mayor's fight to serve in Alabama won a 2024 Community Voice and Anthem Award. Aaliyah is also the editorial director for Storyworks Theater and a playwright, whose credits include Wade Through the Waters, for which she received a 2020 Mississippi Humanities Council Preserver of Mississippi Culture Award. Aaliyah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So before, I know you've prepared a few slides for us to walk through the whole center's journey. But before you get to that, I wanted to personally ask you a question about how where you grew up has affected you and your outlook as a journalist. And I say that because I was born in Cairo, Illinois, a town with a infamous history for racial struggle, et cetera. And I can fully admit that that has affected my journalism career. So I want you to tell us about how growing up in Clarksdale has infused or fueled your journey.
Yeah, I actually have a slide on that, but I can I can share it later. Um, you know, I was born and raised in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and it is a small majority Black town that's about 77 or so miles south of Memphis, Tennessee. It's also known as the birthplace of the blues, which, as the story goes, I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with it, but Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads in Clarksdale, and he became the best musician that ever was. So that's one of the stories that Clarksdale is known for, being this birthplace of the blues, but it's also known as, this hub of for the civil rights movement during that time. And so, um, as a child, I have so many fond memories of Clarksdale. It's been described as a place with limited employment opportunities, a place filled with poverty, a place with poor health outcomes. And of course, as a child, I didn't envision Clarksdale as this way. I am one of four children. My mom worked multiple jobs. My dad also worked multiple jobs to provide for us. And I just recall, being one of those children who loved to enjoy outside, whether it was learning how to roller skate, learning how to skateboard, falling and scraping my knee, playing hopscotch, participating in many extracurricular activities from cheerleading to volleyball to being an honor student, all of these different things. And so as a child, I just enjoyed being in that and like playing a role in these different communities, which actually, as I think about it now, has shaped the way that I see my work as a journalist. But I remember even, growing up, I would start to question the world around me. And I was always curious about the makeup of Clarksdale. I would always wonder why were there this railroad track that separated the white side of town versus the Black side of town? why every year I barely had a teacher in the classroom. It would be a consistent turnover of educators. Why were we housed in dilapidated buildings? What happened to the bowling alley I used to go to? What happened to the movie theater I used to visit as a middle school student? I just started to see jobs disappear. And I started to see or recognize, this Clarksdale that had been described in this news coverage. And I would recall listening to, my mother and my grandmother and people around me talking about how there's always bad news about Clarksdale. Who are they talking to get these narratives? Why are these always the narratives that we see about our town and our community? And I just knew there was something wrong with that. And of course, at that time, I had no clue I would be a journalist or even wanting to be in this field, but I knew that I wanted to stay rooted in community and really listen to people about their lived experiences and their stories and all of these different things that I was seeing and hearing, but I had no forum at the time to, where would I discuss these things or where would I put the energy into crafting these discussions? And so I see all of those ways in which I, grew up in Clarksdale and started to realize the place that I lived as like really the root of the type of storytelling that I wanted to do. Like just listen to people, observe, and allow that to help frame, the stories that I would then start to cover. So that's a little bit of how I envision growing up in Clarksdale, um, serving as like the focus for my work today. And I guess I can start sharing the slideshow. I kind of
Why don't you? That's a good way to make that shift.
okay, 1 second. And I can skip the slide where I just talked about okay, how I use Zoom all the time. Where okay, I think this is it here. But yeah, don't judge me. I tried my best to make this a pretty slideshow. But yeah, I'm again Aallyah Wright, the rural issues reporter for Capital B, and I cover rural Black communities across the country. I often like to think of my work as covering the millions of Black people, particularly in the South, who often live, work, and endure political and economic conditions that aren't always in their favor. And this slide here kind of shows you some of the people that I've had the pleasure of telling their stories. As a young reporter over here, when I first started out in my career, a little bit later, and then these are just some of the folks across the South who have been photographed for stories. And so, this has shown up in many ways, whether it's me covering, Black farmers fighting for equitable resources from the United States Department of Agriculture, or it's landowners who are suing developers for trying to take their land or communities who are, working together to bring a grocery store to their small town. I'm always looking for ways that one, I can, kind of expose or investigate systemic injustices, but also be able to highlight the resilience of these communities in trying to create change. And so I've often heard that, I'm a reporter who, reports with empathy and nuance and care. But I've recently been known as the reporter who brought sinners to her hometown. Have many of you seen the film? Heard? Okay, cool, cool. So yes, it was set in my hometown, and through, my reporting and some grassroots organizing, we were able to bring several screenings of Sinners over a 3-day weekend. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. This was the slide about Clarksdale that I wanted to show. Over here, it shows me, this is me here doing work in middle school. I found this picture on Facebook. Oh my goodness. This is me in elementary school. I had no recollection of this, but apparently I was in the local newspaper for being a good citizen. Not sure what the criteria was for that, but that I thought that was pretty cool, especially as I think about my role as a journalist now and the fact that I showed up in the newspaper and then I saw like another article in the newspaper that I was actually interviewed for. So that was pretty cool to see. And then here, I was homecoming queen, so that's a picture of me there. And then this is the landmark, the crossroads, with the guitars of where they say Robert Johnson sold his soul, to the devil. And so that's a landmark that tourists are always coming to take pictures by. I didn't know I wanted to be a journalist. My mom was an avid news consumer. Before she took us, well, to school in the morning, she would have it on cable news. When she gets off work, she would have it on there, and we would always, be watching the news, and she would always pick up the local paper as well. And I didn't necessarily think that was something I could do. I liked writing, but I was too shy to be in front of the camera. And I felt like I was also too shy to share any ideas about what a story could even be. And so in high school, probably around my sophomore or junior year, all of my classmates, they were like, you should be a journalist, you should be a reporter. And I'm like, huh, me? And it was also because I didn't necessarily see that representation on the local level. Like in my hometown, the only Black person that worked at the local newspaper was a journalist. And at that time, I would take pictures on my, those portable cameras, but I didn't think I could be a professional photographer. And so I had continued to think about this idea of being a journalist, still not really knowing what I would get myself into, but being encouraged by my classmates. I was like, why not? Why not give it a shot and see what happens? So I decided to apply to colleges, and I ended up enrolling in a journalism program at Delta State University, which is about 45 minutes from my hometown. And I enrolled, but I didn't enjoy it. And I had learned the basics, the inverted pyramid, the nut graph, interviewing, research, all of the things, right? But I didn't connect with any of the coverage until one year I did. So this is a photo of Cleveland Hall, which was the oldest women's dorm on campus. And at the time, one of my good friends had lived in this dorm. And I was on the student newspaper, and we were just, having a normal conversation. It was spring break. And she and others decided that, hey, we're going to stay on campus. We're not going to go home. And it was very unfortunate timing because it was raining. It was a really horrible storm that came through that week. And she was basically like, Aaliyah, it's raining in our dorm, like literally raining. Our clothes are damaged. There's even mold growing in our closets, and we can't get any assistance from the administration. And I was like, what? Are you serious? And I reached out to like the facilities management people, right? They ignored me. They're probably like, oh, this student journalist, we're gonna dismiss her. And I was like, you know what? I need to go there. I need to interview these young women and I need to see what's going on. So I got my phone at the time, an Android. I am a proud Apple iPhone user now. But I had an Android at the time, and I remember just taking a video. Like there were huge garbage cans in the middle of the hallways collecting the rainwater. I saw their clothes on the floor damaged. Some had put their clothes in garbage bags. I also saw where one of the young women had her closet repainted. So they didn't do anything to the mold. They basically just repainted her closet to make it seem like it was new. And I was like, this is horrible. And they were like, no one's listening to us. So I went to their dorm supervisor and she's like, yeah, I put in a request. We haven't really heard back. And I continued to reach out to the facilities management people. They wouldn't get back to me. And I was just so frustrated. And I talked to my journalism advisor at the time. I was like, what do I do in this situation? I don't know. And she was like, just tell them you're going to publish this on Monday. It's going to go in print. And they refuse to talk to you. I was like, I never thought to do that. literally the moment that I told them, like, hey, these are what these young women are saying. Do you have a response? If not, we're just going to run this article and that's that. They immediately got back to me. It was like, hey, we can't do an interview, but we can respond to your questions, X, Y, and Z. And so what I appreciated going, that route and saying that because I was able to learn more about the actual history of this building and how, difficult it had been for them to actually upgrade the facility because of, limited funding. They would patch it up, all of these different things I had no clue about before. So after my reporting, those young women were then relocated from the dorm to another dorm so that they can actually make, renovations to the building. And years later, I learned that the dorm officially closed. And so those women were able to pick and choose other dormitories that they wanted to live in. But what I took away from that, and after talking to them, and it just kept circling back in my mind how they said, Aallyah, we finally felt heard. Like, if it was not for your reporting, this probably wouldn't have happened. And at that moment, I truly realized my power and how I could use journalism as a way to help people and, create some change. And if I hadn't, heard from those students first, I wouldn't have gotten the videos. I wouldn't have even had the insight I needed to form the right questions to go to the maintenance department. And so since then, I was just like, I want to keep doing this. This feels really good to be able, to create some change for folks. And so over the course of my career, I've continued to use this approach, really listening to the lived experiences of folks as I, report out their stories. And so it doesn't always translate to, some sort of tangible change, but in some ways it has. And so I'll bring up this story in particular that has really stuck with me throughout the years. And there's other examples. If we have time, I can bring those up as well. But this story I reported when I was in Mississippi as a reporter for Mississippi Today. And there was this small community of elders who were living in trailers in a super remote area in the Mississippi Delta. You literally had to drive down a gravel road to get to this community. Like, it was super remote. And I remember seeing the cable news channel, the local news station, doing like this really short piece about this. Like, these families are without running water. And that was pretty much it. And I was like, wait a minute, what? In 2019 at that time, they don't have running water. Like, what's going on? And so I decided, to do a little bit more digging and really find out what was the case with these families. And so they were operating on like this water pumps, and the pump had broke and it cost like thousands of dollars to fix it. They didn't have the funds because these are like retired community of elders. And so what they would do is drive 20 to 30 minutes to the nearest convenience store or dollar store. And they would have these super large jugs where they would fill up with water. And these are like literally frail people having to try to, carry these gallons of water. And in other cases, they would just buy bottled water. So they would use this to cook, to clean, to bathe. And they were doing this at this time for 6 months. And they had reached out to their county officials. The county officials said that they didn't have money to move around or any additional funds to actually build them a modern, system. And so they donated water. And I was like, there has to be, something more that, the government or somebody could do. And so I published this first story literally immediately after this story published. The Mississippi Public Service Commission reached out directly to me. And this is basically the authority that oversees like water, gas, utilities. And they're like, this is horrendous. We read your story. How can we get in contact with the families? And so I talked to the families first because I didn't want to just give out their information. They said it was okay. And I, basically connected them. And so the Public Service Commission gathered a group, a local nonprofit, some other state and local officials to kind of create a plan for what to do. And so I could continue to check in on that family. Folks were donating water to help them. And a year later, the Mississippi Department of Human Services found a grant that was, I think, like $63,000 and granted that to that local nonprofit to help build this community a new water system. And they credit it to, the reporting that I did. And I bring this up because you don't always have to be the first, right? I know there's this culture of wanting to be the first to get the news out or the first to report on something. But I wasn't the first to report on this. I just saw that this local news station didn't have the capacity to build on this reporting and saw an opportunity to go deeper. And that, fortunately, help this community to get the attention of state officials to actually do something. And so, yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit more diving deeper to be that thing that the community needs. And so that was a really cool example of it took a year, but it's still, they still were able to see some change. So I've written stories where organizations have received funding to continue their work. I've written stories that have sparked, state lawmakers to introduce legislation to try to, help alleviate the teacher shortage crisis in Mississippi. I've written stories that allowed attorneys to want to work pro bono with community members. And I think it speaks to the power of building trust and deep listening and just using the voices of these folks I talk to and allow that to shape not only the framing of the story but the way that I write the story. um and as I think about all of this sort of impact that I've been able to see, I think it's a direct result of all of the things that people don't see, right? Like, I've sat in all these city hall meetings that are sometimes boring, and I'm like, why am I here? It's not going to result in a story. Or school board meetings, or reading hundreds of documents of legislation or litigation, sitting in classrooms, creating non-traditional journalism settings like creating a play based on real stories, hosting public newsrooms where we bring community members together to share ideas and resources and solutions. I've always found a way to show up, but also finding ways to provide public services and being and helping to connect people that wouldn't be in the room otherwise. And I think it's, this type of work that this type of community engagement that has like really been critical to, the type of work that I've been able to do and what has manifested in a thing like centers. But the work hasn't like always been received well. I've, had pushback from editors about, can we document or measure this impact? And I'm like, well, if 5 people show up to this community gathering that we're having, that's still really important because the conversations are still rich. We're still building trust and community with just 5 people. Like, you don't need 500 people to show up to say like this thing really matters. And so I've had to always kind of push and advocate for, these different ideas that I've had in ways for, for us to show up. I've had some editors tell me, hey, the stories you're talking about, why do people really care? They don't really matter. And that I should keep my identity away from the journalism that I want to do. And I've learned that that is actually my superpower. Knowing who I am and where I come from and my lived experiences and my family and friends' lived experiences. Like, I always put those things at the forefront because I know there are other communities who are going through similar challenges, and it may look different, but it's still the realities that folks are facing. And so that's one thing I've really had to learn and like embrace, that like ensuring your identity is a part or it's a guide to help you figure out what needs to be covered and how, like whose voices need to be heard. Is mainstream or local media covering this? If not, like what is missing? What can I add to this conversation? I think you can, always be fair and accurate and truthful in your reporting while also allowing, your identity to be your North Star. And so these are just a few different photos of where I've shown up and how as I try to continue this approach to of community engagement journalism. And it's this truth that led me to Sinners. So what you see on the screen now is the first story I reported, the second story, and then a newsletter. So for years, what I should have mentioned earlier about Clarksdale that I didn't is that there is a super lucrative blues tourism industry in Clarksdale. And every year there's multiple blues festivals that happen in Clarksdale. And those festivals are usually put on by either people who are white or people who are not from there. They may be residents there, but they're not originally from Clarksdale. And these festivals are usually geared toward tourists. And so, as a result of that, the Black community in Clarksdale often feel like these festivals don't benefit them. And they think that it primarily benefits tourists, white business owners in the downtown area where a lot of the majority white businesses are. And in addition to that, Black businesses are struggling to survive, as well as a couple of juke joints that are still around. And so I've been wrestling with, this idea for years. It wasn't until the movie Sinners came out where I started to think more about it. But I didn't want to write a story about the film Sinners because we don't really do that. And so it just so happened one of my colleagues said, Aallyah, Sinners is based on Clarksdale. You have to like see this. And I'm like, wait, what? Why don't I know this? And I talked to my editor and she was like, yeah, are you thinking about going to see it? I'm like, yeah. She's like, do you have any ideas about the story? I'm like, I don't really know. And she was like, let's just talk this out. And the same thing that I told y'all about this thinking I had been doing about this blues industry and how juke joints are, literally dying. She was like, that's interesting. We should explore that. She's like, but go see the movie first, and then we can continue talking about it. So I went to see the movie and I, heard these references of places in Clarksdale that I knew and names that I found familiar. And I went back to her and I was like, that's the story. This film seems to be honoring the blues and the juke joint and like Black ownership, but then you have these folks who are trying to take this art form from the folks who created it. And she's like, let's just go there. And so I did this first story about how there's, this culture in Clarksdale and there's, juke joint owners who are struggling to survive, but like the Black community in Clarksdale are trying to overcome that and they're trying to host their own festivals and do these, other interesting efforts to preserve this art form and this identity. Then I did a second story like, okay, if you watch Sinners, here's some stuff that you can read. But I kept thinking about this idea. Like, I live in Maryland now. I can go to any movie theater and watch this film. But back at home, you have to drive an hour plus, like an hour and 30 minutes to get to the nearest movie theater. And I thought that wasn't right. So I aired that out, that frustration out in the newsletter. And I'm like, there's just something about this film being about a place, but the people in the place, they cannot see it. And next thing you know, as I'm thinking about this, and I share, the newsletter in my story, one of my Clarksdale friends on Facebook wrote this under my post. Aallyah, there's a petition happening, and we're trying to get Ryan Coogler and Warner Brothers to come to Clarksdale and bring the film here. And I was like, wait, the community is actually like screaming out, we want you to bring this here, not just to say, hey, we want to see the film, but to really engage in conversation about this, to show you our history, to show you the sites that you mentioned in the film, to really see, the Clarksdale today and not the Clarksdale of the 1930s. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to share this. So I shared this petition or open letter on Twitter. It started to go viral. I shared it on Facebook. It started to go viral. And I was like, wait a minute, I need to talk to my editor about this. So I talked to her, I talked to the audience team, and I'm like, what do we need to do? Should we write a story? What should we do? They were like, you know what? Let's write a story. So I wrote this story about how this organizer, Tyler Yarbrough, decided to write this open letter to bring sinners home. And the thing about Tyler is that I had interviewed him years ago when he was in high school and in college. So I had followed his journey of activism for a while. And while I don't talk to him on the phone every day, I check in gradually. And I do that a lot with my sources, just check in gradually to see, how they've been, what's going on, just to keep that line of communication open. And so he was like, yeah, I'll talk to you for the story. And that came out to be the story. And so the story went viral. And The Guardian talked about it, USA Today, even came up on Victor Blackwell's show on CNN. And you can see my article in the background there. And they interviewed Tyler about this. And what we came to know as this news cycle was happening and everybody was picking the story up, that Ryan Coogler saw the petition and he reached out to Warner Brothers and was like, we need to do something. What can we do? And literally, I don't even know how many days it took, but Warner Brothers reached out to Tyler and Tyler called me. He was like, I think something is going to happen. And he was like, if you want to join the cause, you can join the cause. We really respect your work. We trust you. You were the person to break the story. We want you involved. And so we continued those conversations. And we didn't know that Ryan Coogler, some of the cast and the crew would be there, but they were thinking about, okay, what could this, weekend of events be? And they were like, well, if they do come, Aallyah, we want you to interview them. You deserve that as a daughter of Clarksdale, as a respected journalist, and someone who truly cares about this community. And so it happened. Um, this here is a photo of me, Tyler, and Ryan Coogler. Me and Ryan Coogler laughing at something he said. Some of the Capital B leaders and Ryan and his wife. Photo here of me interviewing some of the cast and crew. And then this is a short or a cropped photo of a reception that Capital B hosted at a local blues club where Ryan and others attended. But again, I keep talking about this trust and relationship building because if it wasn't for all of the years that I put in to really get to know people beyond Aallyah the journalist, I don't think this moment, would have happened. And I say it here like because I was like, oh, this happened by luck. Like this was a lucky thing to happen to me. And it's actually like, no, this moment isn't by luck. Like, and it because it doesn't happen overnight. It's because of again this point that I keep making about this years of showing up, even when I'm tired. Being on hour-long conversations to multiple conversations to going to community events that might not, manifest in anything, but a connection with someone. And the intention to not just cover, the quote unquote negatives of a community, but the joy, the resilience, the culture, like all of these other things that make a community special and make a community what it is. I've been committed to like balancing that coverage, making sure there's nuance, there's background, there's context, all of these things that make for, great journalism. And so while Sinners was this highlight for me, this highlight for the world to see, again, it's the things that they don't see what led to this happening. And I think what I want to say too is that I've talked a lot about, some of this impact that you can visibly see, this dorm room closure, residents being able to get clean running water, sparking legislation, or, this screening coming to my hometown. But I don't think that's the impact that we should always strive for. Like simply elevating voices, honoring their stories, spreading awareness about the challenges and the realities that they face on the day to day, holding the powerful to account, just listening. I think sometimes that can be the true impact that some of these communities really need or even want. And I just want to make sure as we're, listening to what I'm saying about centers, which is a really profound moment that happened for me and for Clarksdale, that I don't want to lose sight of the importance of all those other things that, matter when we talk about covering community. And so, yeah, these are some different ways that you can, of course, reach out to me. And I can share this slide and any links that y'all would like me to share. But let me stop sharing my screen. So if you have any questions, because I talked a lot, so
Aaliyah, this has been such a powerful conversation for me to have because I think I mentioned I'm from this small town in southern Illinois that was known for racism and whatever. And the economic sort of deterioration and of Cairo is heartbreaking for me. And so one of the things I wanted, before I open it up to any questions, please start raising your Zoom hands or drop your questions into the chat. But before I open it up, I wanted to ask you about some of the things that I have heard throughout my journey, and that is, sort of the pushback against the quote, activist journalist, somebody who is too involved. Um, and again, 40 years ago when I was coming up, lived experience was sometimes held against us. We were told that anybody can cover that topic. And, a competent journalist can go into a community and get the story. You might be a little too close to the issue. So what do you think about that? You mentioned some of it, but when some might perceive your work as activism.
yeah. I was taught when I talked a little bit about the journalism program that I was in, but I was taught to, be objective and um you should make sure that you have balance in terms of you have this particular voice and you have that particular voice um in the story. And I've learned that, the truth is the truth, and my job is to make sure I'm going after that. And so I often, and I also understand that there's been a history of not prioritizing the voices of those who are often oppressed or marginalized. Um, And a lot of times those folks aren't given space to even share what the challenges are that they face. Like there's, you know, heavy weight given to those with official voices. Like, oh, we're going to give more space in this article to the police chief because they have this official statement on this incident that happened. Or, oh, we're going to give this amount of space because they're a state lawmaker and they have this official title, right? And I've always been, of the belief once I really start to embrace it is that we have to make sure that we're not continuing that type of coverage. If this is a community where, again, there's always, we know these different factors that contribute to this oppression and why a community is what it is, this racism, all of these things that affect these people from thriving economically, socially, educationally, whatever those things are. I just feel like it is our responsibility to make sure that those people are at the forefront of the coverage, period. If I did not take time to truly listen to the people of Clarksdale, the Black community of Clarksdale, I would think that there's this awesome blues economy that is happening, all of these festivals that are happening to give people something to do. And I would just think like, oh, this is just this thriving town that people just love and enjoy until you really talk to the people and they're like, oh, we don't go to that. That's not for us. We're still in poverty. We can't get jobs. We are enrolling our children into these failing schools where they can't even get a teacher. And we don't see how these things are benefiting us. We don't see how these things are raising us up out of this poverty. And so I don't even think about it as, you know, activism work. I just think like it's just a part of the work.
Beautifully put. Tamia, introduce yourself to Aaliyah and ask your question.
Hi, Aaliyah. It's so nice to meet you. I followed your work for a really long time and really respect all the reporting you do, so I appreciate you sharing so much with us today. I was wondering if you could walk us through your regular kind of like pitch process or how you look for stories on a regular basis. I'm sure with rural reporting, it's a little bit different than if you were doing like national news every day. So I was wondering if you could walk us through that process.
Yeah. So it's a little bit different now than when I first started. Because one, it wasn't a pandemic then, and I would just go, go, go and show up to everywhere. And I was more local versus now, like I'm national and covering like a um, broader issues, but also just like more communities across the country. So I'm usually doing a few different things. I'm either responding to what's happening in the news, and I'm thinking about what communities I may not have covered. So let's say um, I want to focus on Texas, and I may go to like this because there's this federal list of like rural counties and urban counties. And so I'll pull up that list of rural counties and like, oh, I haven't heard anything about this particular rural county. Let me see if I can find somebody there. So it may be, you know, responding to the news, or maybe a source of mine has emailed me or called me, or there's something happening. Or I'm reading, I know there's like not as many local papers anymore, but I'm reading the local papers. I'm on social media. Like the only reason I got that centers coverage was literally being on social media and someone tagging me um in that open letter. I'm also, yeah, just always kind of in deep reflection too. So like I'm thinking about my hometown, the challenges that still exist there, talking to family members and seeing like how that is common in other places. So it's like a mix of like conversations, news coverage, social media, maybe you know, research or reports, those sorts of things, or even just talking to my editor because my editor will see different things that happen. So yeah, and I'm just in reflection about because I travel a lot too. So if it's something I noticed in a place and I haven't had a chance to just really tap into that, I'll just have a list of things that I write down, and when I have time, I just go back to that thing, or I have a question about something. So it's kind of a mix of all of those things.
I really like that advice about being in deep reflection and really taking advantage of that moment of thinking deeply about it and then
Yes.
write something down. Let's go to Bria. Bria, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Bria. I'm a reporter at the Charlotte Observer. I've followed your work for a while, so I'm so glad we had an opportunity to hear from you. So thank you for speaking with us. I wanted to ask you a question based on what you were talking about a little bit earlier. I think in my experience in our industry, there's a lot of focus on being first or being quick, and also understanding that building relationships and having a deep understanding of communities, especially those that have been unserved or underserved by the media for a long time, it takes a lot of time. So I wanted to get your perspective on how you've gone about navigating with editors and kind of convincing them why spending time in certain communities is worth it to, have that deep understanding and to be able to produce stories that are deeply reported and have nuance.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that question because now a lot of my work is more of the enterprise reporting. Like, even if I respond to something that happened in the news, it won't be like a quick turn or a daily. Like, my editor will actually give me time to dive deeper into that thing. And I think part of that is because of the fact that I've built trust with my editor and I've shown the type of work that I produce when she gives me time to do that. So I've had to advocate for because there's communities that are like, I just need to go there. If I literally go there, I will get what I need. They're not gonna talk over the phone. They don't know me. When I show up in person, I just know um, that I'm gonna get what I need. But I think that comes from a lot of one pre-reporting um, that I've had to do to ensure like I have kind of a solid pitch, or at least I know where I'm going with the story. I've at least identified some people in the community or an organization to say like they're interested in talking to me. Um, and I think that I've done that enough that like when I come back with the actual story, my editor is like more than impressed with what I've brought back. So the more that I've done that, they're like, "Oh, we'll give you all the time that you need." So I think it's a lot of just showing what you can do to prove why you need to do more of that work.
Alicia, introduce yourself.
Hi, Aaliyah. I'm Alicia Brown. I'm a reporter at State's Newsroom. I'm also your fan and friend, if I can say that.
Hey, girl.
I'm just so happy to hear from you and see you. Just want to say, but I do have a question. So let's say 5 years from now, you're at a legacy newsroom, which if hiring editors have any sense, you will be. Do you think the clips and work you've done at Capitol B, Mississippi today, and all your other work will help you push back against editors who subscribe to the notion of objectivity?
Absolutely. And I think that I say that because of the impact that I can show comes from this work. And it's not, again, it's not just a law has been changed or sinners comes to Clarksdale. Like I've document, the messages of gratitude. Um, we're so happy someone is finally listening to us and getting the story right, the accuracy, or I just had someone recently tell me, like, brought them to tears and almost brought me to tears, that they said that I've been covered by news organizations before, but this was the first time I truly felt like my story was represented the right way. And your storytelling felt like writing of the ancestors. And I will never forget that. Um, and in other ways, like being able to provide resources. Like I did this story about how to track your genealogy. And I had spoken to some historians, some genealogists, because I had continued to hear from people, about, finding information about their ancestors and distant relatives because they're battling these different heirs property issues and land loss issues. And I'm like, how can I find how can I create like this one-stop shop for how to do this work to research your heritage, but also resources to help you protect your land? And there's so many people who were just like responding to that, like, thank you so much. I didn't even know where to go for this. So it's like there's all of these type of outcomes that come from like effectively inspiring folks, sparking them to, create some sort of action, um, or even just like helping them in their daily lives with something as simple as, what resources do I need to protect my land so I can keep it in my family? So I think there's a number, yeah, of things that I can point to about like why this coverage matters. And then of course there's plenty of times where my story has been the top story in the news organization's history, right? So I can point to like, oh, this story got millions of views. It was picked up by the New York Times or Apple News or whatever. There's all of these different ways to say why that coverage matters.
We can take a couple of more questions. Monique, introduce yourself.
Yes, hi Leah. Also, like everyone else, gonna sing your praises and kudos. Big fan, been following your work as well. And freelancing for Capital B, so of course I stay on y'all's homepage. But just wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit on your answer about pre-reporting and whatnot. I think it was to Bria's question. I don't have this issue right now, of course, but in the past, like I have with editors when it comes to, they say they quality over quantity, but in the end, like they still want quantity, right? So how did you get to that point of, I guess, trust with your editor, to even have the time to pre-report? Because a lot of times I find that, I was doing the pre-reporting on the side. Didn't know that I was pre-reporting for a story because I hadn't pitched it fully yet. It was more so because, okay, I'm like, if I'm going to come and pitch the story, I know it's a story, but I got to come hard with, like, this is why I know it's a story, right? Almost like your full presentation. How did you get to that point where you were comfortable enough to pitch it kind of early and be granted the time to pre-report, then come back to your editor and say, hey, I found X, Y, and Z. And they're like, okay, yes, go do that story. And this is the story. So how did you kind of navigate getting to that point?
I Yeah, with my editor now, I over communicate. And I learned that that's the best way for us to work together. Like, even if it's a little nugget, I'm like, it's not fully baked right now, but I just want to keep you updated on my progress of this thing so you know that I'm working towards this larger story that I plan to pursue. So that's, I mean, yeah, I completely over communicate. And I do that too because now I'm at a point where I'm working on multiple things where it's like, oh, I might be working on a story that's due in a week while I'm working on this enterprise story that might be due in 3 weeks, while I'm also navigating this year-long investigative reporting project that um, I set a goal for myself to finish by X, date. So a lot of it has been like us having sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes hour-long conversations about like the progress of things or how I'm feeling about things, or even just like figuring out what's the best way for us to work together. So I've always found that over communication has been the best way for that for me. So I think just like really, being honest with yourself and your editor about the ways in which, y'all can work together on that. So I hope that's helpful.
Let's take one more question from Chloe. Chloe, introduce yourself.
Hey. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Like everyone else has said, had been following your reporting, so it's really exciting to talk to you. My question is similar to Monique's, in the point that like it relates to editors kind of and higher ups. Because a lot of the times when I am covering a story that is like going deeper into a community that is either mine or not, like what happens is like because the story goes out, I maintain a relationship with them. They'll ask me to like further cover a related story, in that community. And the struggle for me always comes from trying to convince my higher ups that this community is important to return to in our reporting. I guess I wanted to see if you have any advice for those conversations of like how to convince, and then when that convincing fails, how to also maintain that trust with those community members, because I don't want to like I don't want to ever like just drop them. Um Even if like I'm still communicating with them, not having like a result for them always feels disheartening, I think. So any advice on that?
Yeah, I still deal with that. So just to be clear, all of my ideas don't get greenlit, but I never throw them away. Like I always keep them because I'm like, okay, it might not be right now. Like this story I did recently about the in Clarksdale, there's this Old Timers Blues Festival that was started in 2018 because this juke joint owner wanted to honor his 60-year-old friends because they were, more musicians were dying out. There wasn't a platform really for them. And he wanted to like pay homage to them at this blues festival. And I had pitched that at a different newsroom I was in at 2018. And the editor was like, I don't really know if we want to cover old people playing the blues. And he just like shut down that idea completely. Which is fine because now I got a chance to cover it, given like all of this stuff with sinners and the importance of preserving like blues as an art form in this place called the birthplace of the blues. So it just happened to work out where I got to cover it now. So if I would have continued to listen to him, I would have just like completely shut down that idea, never visited again. But fortunately, again, like I said, I was able to cover it. But in terms of relationships with my sources, I mean, I just keep it real with them. And I'm just like, I appreciate our relationship. I want to continue to build with you and I want to continue to cover your community. But oftentimes it's not, I don't say like it's not a priority, but there's other, communities that I have to cover and I'm spread thin or stretched thin and there's only, so much I can do. Or, my editor wants me to shift focus right now. There's something I'm saying that it's like, it's not that it doesn't matter, but, right now, isn't necessarily the time because of um, you know, other stories that I might have to cover. And I just also think through what makes a interesting story for my editor. So maybe I kind of fine tune my pitch a little bit, or maybe I'm talking to more people or doing more research, but I try to find a way to compromise with my editor so that I can still do that story. So it's just always finding what, because I've pitched stories before, my editor is like, nah. But then once I went back and just like did more research to refine the pitch, then she was like, actually, I like that angle better. Like, let's pursue that. So sometimes it's just a mix of different things that you have to try to still get, that story done. And then maybe it's not at your news publication, but I've also pitched a piece to freelance for another, news organization that saw a story, that fit another publication better than my own. And I talked to my editor about that too, like, hey, is it okay if I pitch this somewhere else? So I think it's just a matter of what the story is and how you can kind of finesse your way into still getting that story published.
I like the way you ended on a note of the often Jedi mind tricks we have to play as reporters to get our editors on board. But we've come to the end of our hour, but I have to first say that I'm naming myself the president of the Aallyah Wright fan club because it appears that most of the members of the Widening the Pipeline class are already members. And I want to thank you for a powerful discussion about engaging with communities. I think one thing I wrote down is that when you said the truth is the truth, and it's my job to go after it, and your commitment to elevating marginalized voices is just incredible. So, Aallyah Wright of Capital B News, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank y'all for having me. Feel free to reach out anytime.